Welcome to the Australian Intercultural Society Luncheon series. My name is Hash Dalal. I'm the Executive Director of the Australian Multicultural Foundation, and my role here today is to say a little bit about the AIS, to introduce our facilitator and welcome you. First, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we stand, and pay my respects to the elders, both past and present. Let me also welcome our guest speaker, the Honourable Daniel Andrews, Leader of the Opposition, who will be properly introduced by our facilitator, Mr. Steve Walsh. Now, I would like to introduce everyone by name. I have over 120 people with a list of 40 VIPs, so I don't intend to go through it name by name for a number of reasons. One would think there's an election in the air, but I would think it's more the personality and popularity of Daniel that you're all here for. But let me say welcome to the Honourable Peter Hollingworth, former Governor-General of Australia, the Deputy Lord Mayor Susan Riley, State Members of Parliament Frank Maguire and Hong Lim. But I also would like to welcome the large representation from the diplomatic corps, which includes Turkey, Lebanon, the Sultanate of Oman, the Arab Republic of Egypt, the Republic of Chile, Japan, Italy and Portugal. Welcome all the Consul Generals who are here today. The Assistant Commissioners of Victorian Police and the Australian Federal Police, Chairs of the Multicultural Commission and the Equal Opportunity Commission, Federal State Government Department representatives and members of the judiciary are here, as well as from people from academia, multi-faith sector, faith representatives, the media sector, and peak and state ethnic community the chairs of FECA and ECCB are both here, the sporting sector and the business sector. I think I'll leave it at that. I think that covers everybody. If I could please say just say a few words about the AIS, and of course I want to acknowledge Ahmed Polat and his team for the fantastic work that they do in hosting these events. You're sort of standing up there, so don't forget me. I won't, never will. The Australian Intercultural Society, as you know, is a not-for-profit organisation and has been operating in Melbourne since 2000. With the aim of promoting multiculturalism and fostering intercultural interfaith dialogue. It reaches out to all members of the community by providing a platform for cultural and information exchange, and they've been doing a terrific job in bringing the community together and having these open debates and forums. But more than that, they've been very active and engaging in the community when it really counts. They believe since their establishment, they've organised many international study tours, academic conferences, cultural exhibitions, Ramadan iftar dinners, which we all know about 30, so be prepared this June, government-sponsored projects, among other activities, and a lot of opportunities for people who wanted to come together and build on those networks and collaborate on joint projects. They believe it's necessary to work in partnership with different segments of society, connecting with cultural and religious organisations, and they've worked with people in the areas of government, public service, education, academia, media, and also collaborated on projects with federal government departments, local councils, state government departments, including organisations like the Victorian Multicultural Commission, the Australian Federal Police, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and great relationships with a number of universities like the Catholic Archdiocese, also the Catholic Archdiocese of Melbourne, the Rotary Club, Deakin University, Monash University, the Buddhist Council of Victoria, as well as relationships with a number of business people here in Australia and in Turkey. Some of their particular achievements have been the partnership with the Australian Catholic University, which funds the Gülen Chair in the study of Islam and Muslim Catholic dialogue, and provides academic leadership in the research of Islam and Muslim Catholic relations and informs dialogue and engagement practices. They have an advisory committee, and they're a very distinguished advisory committee which assists and identifies the programs and projects to enhance multicultural and interfaith activities. And this committee is chaired by the Honourable Bruce Atkinson, President of the Legislative Council, member of Eastern Metropolitan Region, and Deputy Chair is Professor Ray Francis, Dean of Faculty of Arts at Monash University, and I'm also proud to be a member, but welcome all the other advisors here today as well. So with that, it now gives me great pleasure to get to the matter of hand, and that is to introduce you to our facilitator for this luncheon, Mr. Steve Walsh, who is the chairman of Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. Maurice, Blackburn, as you know, is a national law firm specialising in personal injury superannuation and also class actions with an extensive social justice practice. Steve himself joined the firm as an article clerk in 1981 and has practiced as a lawyer in many different areas during his career. They are very strong social justice and advocates for multiculturalism in Australia. And they have just have done fantastic work in the community, because I know I've worked very closely with Steve and his team, and the commitment that they show to the community in trying to make sure that their services truly reflect the society that they're meant to serve, and that is one of a culturally diverse society, and they do a fantastic job in doing that. So it now gives me great pleasure to introduce Steve, to introduce our special guest.
Thank you, Has, for that lovely introduction. Thank you, Ahmed and the AIS, for allowing me to be here today. My role is to introduce our guest speaker, Daniel Andrews. He's a man who probably needs no introduction, really, but let me read to you a little bio just to tell you a little bit more about him that you may not know. Daniel, as you know, is the leader of the Australian Labor Party, leader of the opposition in Victoria. He's also the Shadow Minister for Veterans Affairs and for Multicultural Affairs, and that's of particular interest to this group. Daniel grew up in a small business family in regional Victoria, where he loaded plenty of trucks and milked plenty of cows, apparently. He was quoted in a recent article in The Age as saying, "I've had a fair bit of shit on my boots in my time." And I presume, Daniel, that refers to the bush. He eventually moved to Melbourne, attended Monash University, where he studied politics and the classics. I am told that he wanted to be a Labor politician because of his strong sense of social justice, social inclusion, and wanting to give people who miss out on opportunities access to services that Labor is committed to, such as education, training, employment and healthcare. He joined the Labor Party in 1993, and after graduating from university, he worked for his local Member of Parliament. In 2000, he became a campaign director for the Victorian Labor Party and was elected as its Assistant State Secretary. Daniel entered the State Parliament in 2002 as a member for Mulgrave, representing people in the southeastern suburbs where there is a very strong multicultural and diverse community. He was appointed to the Cabinet in 2006 as Minister for Consumer Affairs and Gaming, and he became Minister for Health in 2007. As a Minister, he devised the landmark Victorian Cancer Action Plan and funded the state's first comprehensive cancer centre. Daniel was elected the leader of the Victorian Labor Party by his colleagues in 2010. When Daniel doesn't have his head in politics, I am told that he enjoys ballet.
Watching,
thank you, Daniel. Point of clarification. Daniel also follows the Essendon Football Club, but his wife and 3 young children support Collingwood. Must be one battle you lost on the home front, Daniel. How did you let that happen? When Daniel was growing up in Wangaratta, he lived opposite the local golf course. And I think thanks to his uncle who lent him an old set of clubs, he developed into an utter golf tragic, so I'm told. I think he plays regularly at Kingston Heath and has a strong interest in golf and everything going on in the tour. Now, this is an election year, as you know, and the timing of having a chat about Victorian politics is impeccable. So Daniel will no doubt have a lot to say to us. Let me just finish by again quoting a quote that I read in The Age recently. Daniel said, "People don't want, frankly, bullshit promises that sound good but don't achieve much. What they want is someone who'll be straight and say, I reckon I can bring some improvement here. That's where we're headed. If people choose it, then we'll be on it. And more than you can believe. If they go another way, then that's the system." So I think Daniel has to be regarded as a straight shooter and somebody who has a plan of action. So without saying anything further, let me introduce Daniel to have a chat to you about Victorian politics.
Well, thanks very much for those Well, I think that was a kind introduction. I'll come back to Shane Green, who is someone of such amazing integrity and a great journalist, and someone who's made a huge contribution to journalism and public debate in our state and our nation. He rode around in the back of my car for a little while, and that article is what came out of it. I was a little frank. That's a good thing, I think. But I wouldn't want to give you the impression that that's the only sort of words I use in what I'd hope is an expansive vocabulary. Hopefully I can show you a few other turns of phrase today. Can I, of course, begin my remarks? And I want to try and be brief in my speech and then give as much time as possible for questions and answers. Answers are always important. I promise I'll try and provide answers to the questions that you may ask. I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders past and present. There is a very long and distinguished list of people who have joined us for lunch today. In fact, you all, in many different ways, make a really powerful contribution to our multiculturalism, a powerful contribution to the strength and prosperity of our state. You, in so many different ways, are the reason why we as Victorians can be proud that we lead our nation in ideas, in enterprise, in culture, in, I think, a progressive brand of politics, a confidence in our own identity. And then I want to return to that theme in a moment. Your contribution in so many different ways is central to that, and for that you should be abundantly proud. There are too many different sectors represented here, and Hass has done a great job and has done justice to that. I won't try and emulate that. I do want to acknowledge Ahmet for the fantastic work that he and his team do. Can I thank and acknowledge as well my parliamentary colleagues. I think the President, Bruce Atkinson, is here, someone who is a great friend of multiculturalism, and I see on the odd weekend as much of Bruce as I see of my own family, attending lots of different multicultural community events right across the state. Bruce's electorate is not that proximate to mine, but he can be seen regularly at so many different functions. And I want to return to that notion of bipartisanship and the things that we agree on, and just how powerful that is in just a few moments. Frank Maguire, I think, is here as well, or if not, he's going to be joining us. Frank's here. I said we opened Frank's new office. He was trapped in John Brumby's old office for a little while, outside of his fantastic electorate, Broadmeadows, such a culturally diverse community, a place of great history, a place of great promise, a place also of very significant challenges as well, economically and socially, and I'll return to some of those themes in a moment as well. And at that office opening, I made the point that Frank, in joining the Parliamentary Labor Party, coming to the Parliament after having had such a distinguished career in journalism and in other roles, made us a better Labor Party, and I think Victorians' Parliament a better Parliament. Frank is a great champion for multiculturalism, and I think that's not only the right thing to do, but in Broadmeadows it's the smart thing to do, given how wonderfully multicultural and diverse Frank's community is. Again, Archbishop Hollingworth is here. Could I again, obviously, single him out, someone who's been a great friend of diversity, justice, someone who's always been on the right side of pursuing a better deal for those who are often the most vulnerable. It's appropriate to acknowledge him. Having done that now, I'm on this slippery slope. Where do I stop? I'm not going to keep going. The Editor of the Age is here. I should probably acknowledge him. No. You're all important in so many different ways. And I want to thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedules to be here today. Not just to hear from me, but to share great company. I'm sure there's a Turkish bent to our lunch, so it'll be great food. Thank you very much for being here. I should, of course, acknowledge the many members of the Consular Corps that are with us as well. Thank you again for the kind invitation. Now, I thought I might talk a little bit about state politics and our state and where we find ourselves. I don't want to be partisan, really, in terms of what I'm talking about today. But if I give you a bit of an overview of where we find our state, perhaps give you a sense of some of the things that the traditional two sides in politics in our state don't, I suppose, agree on. And then I want to make what I think is a powerful point about the things we do. We have no disagreement on the things that we actually are fundamentally of one mind about. Our state has for a long time been a centre of manufacturing, a centre of enterprise, a centre of giving people new hope, a centre of welcome, and we should be proud of that. But it's fair to say that we are in a very challenging set of circumstances. Unemployment numbers came out just a few hours ago, a very difficult picture in our state and indeed right across our nation. Now, I don't for a moment offer that commentary with any sense of pleasure, any sense of political opportunism. I don't talk our state down. I'm a very proud Victorian, we all are, and we only want good things for Victorians and for Victoria's future. But part of the responsibility of political leadership, or leadership in any of the organisations that you represent here, from Victorian Police and other emergency services, right through to faith organisations, right through to what might seem quite small and minor roles in terms of community organisations, your local footy club, whatever it is, being frank and honest about the challenges and the opportunities is an important part of leadership. And I think there is an appetite, further to the comments that were made earlier, I think there is an appetite in our public policy and in our public debate for not frankness as a device to mask ignorance, not a bluntness, a straight talking to mask the fact that you don't truly understand the subject matter you're talking about, and that's often what we see, but an honesty and an integrity. Be clear about the challenge, be clear about the opportunities, be clear about what you'll do, and be clear about what you can achieve. That, I think, is something that people can respect, is something people can rally around. And if we look at many different areas, our health system, there are clear challenges, and I think we need a more transparent discussion about how we might improve those services, given how central they are to every single Victorian, no matter where you live or what you do for a living. And arguably, many who are newly arrived to our state and our nation, particularly those who come from troubled parts of the world, that important humanitarian intake, one that I hope can continue to grow, health services are critically important to that cohort of people. We can look at our schools, look at vocational education, training, TAFE, and again there are challenges there also. And I think we need to be clearer about some of those deficiencies and the fact that I think they hold us back from being a stronger economy, a more diverse economy, one that can shape the future rather than simply be a victim of it. And of course, there's a whole range of important issues in terms of opportunity, dignity, purpose, motivation, and personal security that comes from the empowerment that only education and training can offer. So some frankness in a detailed and I think lucid way is important in that area of public policy as well. In terms of employment more broadly, a lot of talk has been made in recent weeks, and certainly this week, about the robustness of the Victorian economy, the strength of the Victorian economy, and how we're going to find these sunrise industries, these over-the-horizon new economy industries. My sense as I move around the community, and one of the great joys of this job, and it is a great job, it's often described as a hard job, but important work is never easy, and the job of holding a government to account is important work. The job of winning the right to be considered an alternative government is important work. But one of the great joys of this task, being a leader in our community, is to move around and talk to lots of different people with lots of different views, not always necessarily closely aligned with my view of the world, but to talk to lots of people and to listen. And what people tell me is that all sounds good, this over-the-horizon stuff, the new economy. It sounds good and it sounds quite easy. It rolls off the tongue of practiced and professional politicians like me. But making it real, making it tangible, making it relevant to people who have either lost their job and that sense of security I spoke about, or those who do very meaningfully fear that they might be the next to join an ever-growing unemployment queue, that is a different challenge. Far more important, I think we owe it, back to that point about integrity and honesty, we owe it to everyone who feels vulnerable at the moment, and many who may be in the future. We owe it to them to be frank, again, about the challenge, about the opportunity, and to be meaningful and tangible and real when it comes to their skills and their pathway forward. Sometimes, and I would not necessarily make this point as a partisan point, I think perhaps all sides of politics and many different players at many different levels of politics are guilty of the line that sounds good, and that's where the focus is, instead of perhaps being far more focused on doing the hard work to find the skill gaps and fill them, to find the new markets for new products, for new prosperity. And I think there's a lot to be hopeful about. But our words are just a small part of finding the opportunity in the challenges we face. It's our deeds that will be much more important, much more important. I can go on and list many other challenges in our state, but lest you think I wasn't genuine when I said I take no joy in some of those challenges, I won't go on. I want to make the point that often politicians, people like me and the Premier Dennis Napthine and lots of other people will argue, will be in disagreement, will sometimes even fight about those issues that I've just mentioned and lots of others. And they become defining points. And in a 4-lap race, a 4-year term, as we enter the last lap of that race, the bell's rung, we're in the last quarter. We're going to do much better, I hope, than my beloved Bombers did last year. But those things do become, there's a much sharper focus. And they become defining points in terms of the political contest. But in many respects, and I don't want to talk against the campaign that I'm going to continue to run all year, but in many respects, and I think is something that's well understood by this audience, the most powerful things are not always those things we argue about. The most powerful things are more often than not the things that we are of one mind about, where the issues are not dragged into the political contest, they're beyond it. And I think our cultural diversity, our multiculturalism, and I use that word proudly, and I will continue to use that word. It is a multicultural community, and we should be proud of that. But in a multicultural, multi-faith Victoria, issues of migration, issues of support for those who join our community, our way of life, our future, most recently, or issues around assimilation, an abhorrent term that is simply wrong, issues of celebration of identity and shared experiences and values, issues of diversity in its true sense, issues of, I would hope, equality, all of these issues are outside the political contest. And that puts Victoria so far in front of other jurisdictions in our nation and so many other parts of the world. And you can point back to leaders on both sides of politics who, at the time they were at the height of their power, if you like, their active involvement in politics, and I think of someone like Gough Whitlam, and I want to quote at the end of my remarks from a letter right back from 1974, which I think sums up that time and how far we've come. To Malcolm Fraser, to Jeff Kennett, to Steve Bracks proudly, John Brumby, so many different players in the Victorian political scene and nationally have been united on these issues. There's sometimes points of difference around the edges, but in principal terms, in substantial terms, our multiculturalism and therefore our community is so much stronger for not being drawn into that political contest. There are many things to disagree about. The brilliance, the prosperity, the respect, the sense of energy, the power that comes from being a multicultural community is not something any of us need argue about. And I think that is a defining point of our state, and it need not be a defining point of the election we're about to have at the end of this year. Can I just give you one example? In my local community where I'm proud to live and be the representative in the Victorian Parliament, Mulgrave, so Springvale North, Noble Park North, some of Noble Park, Mulgrave itself and Wheelers Hill. It's a very culturally diverse local area. Many post-war migrants, many who've come to our state and our nation in more recent times. We have, for instance, a very significant young Sudanese group, very significant community, and you know, there is an energy in my local community. And one of the best ways to perhaps give you the example of how different we are to other states and other parts of the world is to perhaps listen to the voice of my kids and my experience of my children. And I think all of us who are parents, our kids are in our thoughts today after the terrible, terrible events down at Tyab last night. But I can hear my own son, and I can see as well that his classmates are a very culturally diverse mix. The differences that might be apparent and might be defining for some Australians and for others around the world, he is completely at peace with that. In fact, he doesn't notice it. It is his reality. It is his... That vibrancy is nothing special almost. It is so real, so tangible as to be not unnoticeable, but it's unspectacular. And I'm not saying that we should ever stop celebrating our multiculturalism, but through the eyes of those who know no different, that's the real test, and that is in many respects the most powerful weapon against those who are focused on prejudice, are focused on hate, are focused on, rather than valuing our cultural diversity, our multiculturalism and our multi-faith community, they would attack that in many different forms. When I look across this room, there are so many advocates of tolerance. I don't like that word and I don't use it that often, but in its broadest context I think it's acceptable. We don't tolerate multiculturalism, we celebrate it. But there are advocates for respect, advocates for inclusion, advocates for harmony, and not just in a positive sense. There are those who've done enormous amounts of work to make sure that our state, and I'm proud to have been part of a government that put onto our statute books the laws we need to not just send a message about what's acceptable, but to deal with those who only preach and practice things that are completely unacceptable in a modern, progressive Victoria. And I want to thank each and every one of those people who've been involved in that important work. If I can now just turn to a few issues about the future and challenges that we have to face, and this is in terms of multicultural affairs and our cultural diversity. I think we would be wrong not to bring that same honesty that I've spoken about in health and education and jobs and economic policy. We'd be wrong not to bring that same frankness to a discussion about our cultural diversity. You've got to call out racism wherever you see it. You've got to call out prejudice wherever you see it. You've also got to be really critical about, are we meeting our obligations, offering the promise of a new future and a new life? Are we meeting our obligations to those who come to do just that, to be part of a strong Victoria? And I think there is much work to be done in terms of settlement services. There's much work to be done in providing, particularly with ageing, cultural reversion, whole range of other issues, particularly in terms of culturally appropriate care, culturally appropriate service provision, translation, interpreters. There are many issues that we need to do better at. And that's not offered as a criticism of the current government or any side of politics. These are real and meaningful, and they hold people back. They hold all of us back. We've got to do better. And I hope to be able to have a bit more to say about some of those issues and some ideas we have before the end of this year. Can I just finish before I take your questions by saying I'm very proud of what we all here and those who've come before us have built in our state. We are a standout in so many ways. And I think it's important that just as we stand up and celebrate advancements and discoveries that might have begun in Victoria in medical research, we might celebrate the group of 8 universities that are headquartered here. We might celebrate our sporting achievements. We might celebrate all manner of different things that we should be proud of. But we should always find the opportunity to celebrate that in this state, in this community, your identity is just fine by us, because in the celebration of that, being who you are and never forgetting who you are, you enrich and inspire and you make Victoria a fairer, stronger and a better place for the future. That celebration of identity and shared and collective view is critically important, and that's just as worthy of being held out as a rich asset, perhaps our richest asset. That's just as valuable as any West Australian mineral or anything that might be in the ground in Queensland. So we do have some natural resources, the most natural of resources. They do us proud, and we should always speak up for them. Now, I promised not to be partisan, but I wanted to read, and many will know this quote, I wanted to read something to you before I take your questions, about the journey that we've come on. You know, my 11-year-old, I've discussed with you his view of multiculturalism and just how beautiful that journey has been. But that wasn't always the case. For kids, for adults, for all of us, we had a very different attitude 30 years ago, 40, 50 years ago. And here's an expression in someone else's words that I think explains the journey that we've come on and how important it was that we made that journey. This is Dr. Giovanni Andreoni from the book Letters from Our Heart, The Lives of Australians Through Correspondence. And he writes to his mother back in Italy on January the 2nd, 1974. Mother, I've decided to become an Australian citizen. Time flees and I don't want to miss the chance of participating in the rebirth of this vast and beautiful land. No reasonable person, however, can blame me for not wishing to be assimilated. Assimilation is the dehumanising scheme of colonial Australia. Migrants will be educated into accepting proper roles assigned to them by their masters. Their children will soon forget the old culture and think and act like happy little Australians. That's a destructive policy, he goes on to say. And then here's the key. Well, a huge man stood up in Parliament. His name is Gough Whitlam. And behind him there's an unruly mob of dreamers and reformers. Down with assimilation, they shout. Let us accept and respect each other for what we are. Let's build the new Australia together. The journey we've been on has been so important. There is more to do, and I know those on the other side of politics commit ourselves to finish that work and to always find ways to celebrate the amazing diversity, the multiculturalism, the vibrancy of the progressive capital of Australia, the great state of Victoria. Thank you very much.
Right, now we do have time for questions. Given the numbers here, may I ask that perhaps one question per person? And
Try one
could you make the questions short and on topic, and which make them brief?
Graham Leonard, VMC. Daniel, lovely to hear. Very gratifying to hear your depth of understanding of the challenges that we face in Victoria to continue to maintain our high standard and reputation in multiculturalism. One issue that is relevant, it's not a state issue, but is the proposed changes by the Federal Attorney to Section 18C of the RTA, and I just wondered if you had a policy on that or what your views were, please.
I'm very pleased and very proud to have been part of a government that put the Multicultural Victoria Act in, Racial and Religious Tolerance Act. I spoke briefly about, with the support, can I say, and you won't mind me saying this, I know, with the very active support of the Jewish community in our state, and many others, but it's fair to acknowledge that there was real leadership from the Jewish community on these issues. That's where I'm coming from. I think legislative protections are very important. I think they send messages and they also provide you with remedies that sometimes you need to use. I don't support the changes that have been put forward, and I do hope that the Commonwealth Government, and I do hear some talk that there may well be a more balanced and a better conclusion to that debate and discussion than some people hope or some people think. You know, laws matter. You'd expect a politician to say that, but particularly in these areas, you know, I would hope that we don't. I would hope that the Commonwealth Government perhaps lands in a different place than some people think. I'm not a spokesperson for the Commonwealth Government. I don't think anyone here is.
Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel, I commend you for being bold enough to say some stuff that not been said in election time. But talking about multiculturalism in a time where we are being tested in economic situations where majority that we try to include in our multiculturalism, and especially focusing on the Western region where Toyota is closing, part of the Northern where Holden and Ford are going. Now, aren't we in many countries, multiculturalism or social harmony being tested when there is economic crisis? And partly to mention Europe is a best example. Some of the European countries have shown that, and in many other countries. As leadership now coming to this economic transformation from manufacturing to knowledge and service economy, where we've got majority of newcomers and a significant number of our what we call multicultural constituent have no share in the knowledge and service economy. How is the leadership going to tackle this to keep harmony of multiculturalism? Because multiculturalism pins on economic well-being, and that is now tested. Majority of the people that I live and I share with are just going to the bottom. How bottom is bottom, that to be tested, and leadership to be able to bring that hope in the next election or beyond or before.
So you point to some pretty awful stuff that's been going on in Europe for a while now, and from time to time appalling behaviour and appalling views and sentiments that are sometimes expressed here. My sense of this is that the real measure of a truly civilised society is, do you see the best of people in the worst of times, or something different? And I think we as a state, in dealing with natural disasters, in dealing with economic transition, for want of a better term, and that's happened before, we have a willingness to accept change and work hard to find those opportunities. There is a generosity of spirit in the Victorian, and you could make these comments much more broadly. I'm sort of required to be parochial, and that's because I am. But you could make these comments about Australia as well, but I think Victoria is a little bit different, and we're perhaps out in front on this. I think there's a generosity there, and there are numerous examples of that. So my hope is, even at a time of economic insecurity, unemployment, big changes that are fundamental to people's sense of safety and security, we will continue to see the best of view and attitude, the best of people, despite those challenges. But we should be vigilant about that. We don't want a situation where people are ever singled out and perhaps targeted as an expression, not of any fact, but as an expression of frustration and anxiety at the fact that change is ripping away at the certainties in people's lives. We don't want that. That's not the Victorian way, it's not the Australian way. In terms of if you are newly arrived, or if you are someone who has worked in an industry for a long period of time and you're a migrant of some standing, you're an Australian by choice, and that has been for a long period of time, you will have retraining needs, you will have real challenges, language. We have to be in a targeted response to that new economy and looking after those who are exiting an older one, manufacturing, if you like, parts of manufacturing, I hasten to add, not all of it. We have to be targeted, and that will mean that culturally appropriate support is just as important as geographically targeted support, or industry-specific support, or degree-qualified versus vocationally qualified support. That diversity is as legitimate, as real, and governments should be focused on that just as much as they are on some other issues. That'd be my approach, because that not only is it the right thing to do, but it's how you get much, much better outcomes.
From Doncaster Mosque, the first thing I should do is always thanks to Victoria Police and the Federal Police always, because they keep us safe. Now my question is, coming from my also background with the VACC board member, now the mistake was, looks to me, was made by the semi-government and the government departments to buy the cars, which were green cars or this car or that car, and the cars were not bought, which are still in manufacturing. Now we're in the situation where every motor company is pulling out, and as a VACC member, we've seen that a lot of live industry is going to be pulling out as well, a lot of unemployment. Now, what will be your government, say when you come to the government maybe in November, is there any possibility that salvage these car companies to stay in Australia or Victoria? Thank you.
Look, I think that it's very sad to say this, but Ford's made its decision, Holden has made its decision, and sadly Toyota has made its decision. And what they've effectively done with some microeconomic reform back in the US and some very significant assistance, the sort of assistance that people criticise some for successive governments in Victoria and Australia providing, that assistance and more has been provided back home, and many of these jobs are not so much being repatriated to a low-cost location, they're being repatriated back to Detroit, which is not something that we ever really thought would happen. Now that's not, that's not the entire picture, there are other complexities, but that's a big part of this, a very big part of it. I think we have to accept that on Monday this week, an industry, a sector in our economy died, and we now have to find a way in which either new markets for the same products can be opened up, or those who are in that broad, integrated and really big automotive supply chain are supported to make different products, supported to move into new, not just new markets, but into new industries and sub-industries, if you like. This will not be easy, this will not be quick. You know, we can look back and talk about who did what and who didn't act and all of those things. We will never know whether a different approach, a different industry policy might have had a different outcome. But what we can be certain of is there's an awful lot of work to be done, and what we need, I would respectfully submit to you, is a government that's prepared to get on and do that. And that'll be part of the choice that Victorians will make at the end of this year. And indeed, it'll be part of the choice that all of us as Australians will make in a couple of years after that.
I have an 11-year-old son as well, and I think I was quite horrified to read about the news last night. And my main question is around what kind of conversations are happening to look at the triggers and the pressures that allow this kind of behaviour to happen, whether there are mental health issues involved, whether there's gambling issues that people aren't talking about, drug issues, alcohol, workloads, etc. And I think, are we hearing those conversations, and what kind of leadership is shown around how we tackle that, and so we don't see that? Thanks.
It's really a very good question. I did some media earlier this morning, and I said that I think all of us, whether we're parents or not, all Victorians are carrying this today. They're carrying a small part of this today. Like, it's a solemn day. It's really just, you can't explain it, and you're desperate to put some meaning around it, some context, and facts are not coming forward quickly, and we're kind of looking to grab at that. Why would this happen? How could someone do this to their own child? You know, sometimes there's no explaining things. And that's hard to come with. That's hard to come to terms with. It's desperately, desperately sad. It's a terrible tragedy. We should all spare a thought for family members, for teammates, for classmates, and another group that is sometimes forgotten in this. Look, I know because I had the great honour of being their minister, and the same goes for Victoria Police members. Those ambos will never be the same. They will never be the same. Those that either attended to try and revive that boy, or those who, with the Ambulance Victoria Air Wing, took the father to the Alfred. They'll never be the same again. Nor will police members who were exposed to that. they should all be in our thoughts today. And for those of us, they should be in our prayers too, for those who are inclined to say a prayer. I think we might all say a prayer today for that family. It does, and it's important then, we'll draw a line now, and we'll move on to the broader issue. I think mental health, we've done over 20 years, 30 years, go right back to the Burdekin report, which if people have never read it, go and read it. It's very interesting, and you can get a real sense that we have made some progress, but we've not delivered on so much of the promise of that important piece of work. Done a lot of talking about mental health. We have brought about improvement, both in terms of service, quality, accessibility, uniformity of services, legislative frameworks as well to protect rights, deinstitutionalisation. We should be so proud of that, but we have a power of work to do. A power of work to do. 1 in 5 of us will be touched by mental illness, which effectively means all of us one way or another. That's not to say that and we've got to be careful in this discussion as well, and there are many people who are far more expert at this than I am, who would say that now is perhaps not a good time to talk about mental health reform because you've got to be careful with stigma and those sorts of issues. But mental health, we've got to do more. Drug and alcohol services, their accessibility. I'm not someone who's going to advocate for marriage counselling, but I would advocate for financial counselling and some of those practical supports. Others may have a different view, but I think some of those practical supports, the sense that you're not alone, that you can be assisted and managed and helped through really difficult times, I think that's part of all of this, in a broader sense. And it is fair to say that if you look at some of the transformation and the tragedy that's going to come out of the Victorian economy in the next few years, given the job losses we've been talking about and the ones we haven't heard about yet, and we certainly hope this doesn't happen, but there's a cloud over Alcoa, Shell, there are many other big name companies that are doing it pretty tough. The need for social support, the need for a system and a safety net, whatever other buzz term we want to use, I think that will be heightened. And we do have to have a really honest and frank discussion about the gaps. And worse than that, some places where there's no system at all. So you're right to highlight it. Unspeakable last night. Hopefully some good can come out of everything, even the worst of circumstances, if at appropriate time it gets us talking about some of these issues and what drives someone to that place, that dark place, that evil place, then that's probably a good discussion for us to have.
Not be a good place to finish.
It's not a good place to finish, really, but thank you very much for your kind invitation to be here. Let me go back to the point I first made at the start. Thanks for the contribution you make in so many different areas, so many different fields. All of them make us a better state and a better community, and I think all of you will have a role to play, not only in celebrating the great strength of Victoria as a progressive state, but also you'll have a very important role to play in finding, in different ways, the opportunities that are embedded in each of the challenges we face. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Daniel. Could I now call upon Dr. Peter Hollingworth to come forward?
Well done.
Daniel, now that you've just sat down, having given us what I think has been a fair, frank, broad-ranging and in many ways visionary speech, I think it's worth reminding ourselves that politics, a proper definition of politics, is the ordering of our common life together. And our politicians do that, and we sometimes see some sides, but we see the other side as well. And I think it's been particularly good for us, all of us, from our different perspectives, to hear from Daniel Andrews, leader of the Victorian opposition, Daniel Andrews' father, husband, and good citizen. And it's a particular joy to have heard you, and we look forward to further discourse and dialogue on these matters. I also think it's a wonderful thing that the Australian Intercultural Society has taken this issue And I hope that in the year ahead and in the years ahead, we might do more of this sort of thing, because it enriches all of us and broadens our perspectives. And so, Daniel, I'd like to thank you very much on our behalf, and we have something for you which we hope you might be able to find a place for in your office or at home. There you are. Sultan's clothes.
That's very, very kind.
Made in Turkey.
Choc gazelle.
To Steve Walsh for the excellent facilitation for today. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thanks about emperors and no cloth.
Thank you. To Steve and to your company and for your chairmanship, I thank you very much. You've handled us well. We were a very orderly audience and you controlled us. And thank you, Steve.
Could I now once again call on the Honourable Daniel Andrews to actually make some present some certificates to our 3 sponsors. Without these sponsors, we obviously can't have these events, and so we're very grateful for their support. So I can call on the Honourable Daniel Andrews. Here we go. Could I call on, please, Mehmet Kırmacı? Ata Makara. And Recep Dinmez. Recep Dinmez is not here. I hope he wasn't the food sponsor. That means he's not the food.
On behalf of Recep, you know this here.
Oh, there he is. Oh, we need him.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, that's the end of all the formalities. So once again, thank you very much. I think it's been a wonderful series today with open, frank and inspiring presentation from our guest speaker, Daniel Andrews. And so we ask you to join us for lunch and enjoy the company and all the guests here. So once again, thank you. Thank you, Ahmed, for your team. Thank you.